The 28th of December 2021, a builder was asked to do some work at 277 Crane Point in Jupiter, Florida. Even before the work was completed, the builder knew this was no ordinary job. He was being asked to build an 8 by 8 foot room, which he was told would be an office located in the garage. Little did this builder know he was building a prison cell for two sadistic so-called parents that would be used to imprison, punish, and abuse a 14-year-old boy who was forced to live in constant fear. In late January 2022, the same 14-year-old boy was reported missing by his mother. He was described as having behavioral issues, but this was far from the whole truth and was about to open a huge can of worms after authorities found him. Before we begin, we would like to send our best wishes to the family and friends of the 14-year-old child mainly affected by the cruel treatment of these people. Devout Catholics Tracy and Timothy Ferriter moved to Jupiter, Florida in the summer of 2021 from Arizona. They had 4 children, a couple of which they had adopted. The children were 2, 13, and 16, and another boy who was 14, respectively. From the outside, they seem to be a perfect American family. However, nobody really knows what goes on behind lace curtains in suburbia, and in this case, it would have been impossible to predict. One of the children who had been adopted was a boy born on September 7, 2007 in Vietnam. The Ferriter family adopted him from an orphanage there. Like many children who are orphaned or who have ended up in the care of the state for whatever reason, the young boy did have some behavioral problems, which made him a little difficult to live with. Adoption is, of course, no small matter. Anyone thinking of adopting should be doing it for the right reasons, and it may not be an easy journey. For good reasons, these children often have trust issues that need dealing with. For example, they may have been abused in the past. In these circumstances, it can be very difficult to convince a young person that the world isn't against them. The Ferriter family lived in a stylish modern home in Jupiter, Florida. The property is now listed at being worth some $700,000 in the market today, but it isn't the home we need to focus on. It is the garage. At a good size, the garage had plenty of room, and some of that room apparently was needed for office space. This is when the family contacted Jacques Ben Aim, a local builder. He would be asked to build what would be a portioned room in the garage. He was told that it was going to be used as a home office by Timothy. The problem was there were some strange specifications that came with the job, which made Mr. Ben Aim suspect that it was not all as it seemed. Eyebrows were first raised when Mr. Ben Aim was only given 48 hours to complete all of the work. For this short time period, he would be paid $3,000, which is not bad for just 2 days' work. As mentioned, the room was to be 8 feet by 8 feet, but was not to include any windows. Who really wants to work in a room that doesn't let in any natural light? A deadlock was also to be fitted to the door that could only be opened from the outside. In fact, there wasn't going to be a door handle fitted inside the room at all, just on the outside. A light was going to be fitted in the room, but no light switch. Air conditioning was also installed in the room, and a camera in the ceiling. The only way the light could be turned on was from the outside. Is it any wonder that the builder smelled a rat? If this was to be an office, who in their right mind would want to work inside it? You would have no other light other than the possible glow of a computer screen and a ceiling light that could only be turned on from the outside. You wouldn't have a door handle so you could leave whenever you felt like it. And if someone hit the deadlock, you could be trapped for hours. It sounded a lot more like a prison cell than an office, doesn't it? The builder agreed to do the work, and it was all completed on time, but the very day he left the property, having been paid for his efforts, he immediately called the police to alert them as to what seemed to be a very strange situation. The police did agree to monitor the situation, but didn't want to go in with guns blazing. Instead, they chose to monitor the family from a distance before making their presence known. But before they could make their investigation known to the family would come to them. On the 28th of January 2023, one of the children was reported as missing to the Jupiter Police Department. The adopted 14-year-old boy had suddenly disappeared from the home. It seemed at first that the family had no idea why he should want to run away. Tracy Ferriter said that he had gotten into trouble the day before at school and was told off at home. It was possible that he was throwing a teenage temper tantrum and had left. The police alerted all of their units to keep an eye out for the child, but the parents didn't seem too worried, so there didn't seem to be much of a reason to panic. On January 30th, the police decided to pay a visit to the family home and ask if the boy had returned. He had not. Tracy suspiciously told police to go away and said that she didn't want them involved or entering her home. Without a search warrant or a good reason to acquire one, the police could not do much except leave the premises, but they did make the decision to come back later in the day and try again. Officers returned in the evening, once again asking Tracy to let them in, even if it was just to ask some questions about the missing child, although, of course, they would want to do a bit of snooping around. Tracy, clearly realizing that the officers weren't going to give up, agreed to let just one of them into the property. Even more surprisingly, she allowed the officer to look around the home. Perhaps she didn't think of a good enough excuse to stop him. It wasn't long before the officer discovered the so-called office in the garage. In truth, the officer didn't really know what to think of it. The room was small and sparsely furnished. There was a desk and a fold-up chair in the corner, a lone mattress on the floor, a small light, and in the ceiling there was a camera, and a bucket sat in the corner which had been clearly used as a makeshift toilet. The officer was very unsure about this being an office for the reasons we have outlined, especially since there was no light switch or a door handle. The officer, a little bewildered by what he had just seen, left the property without alarming Tracy, but they clearly had not uncovered the full truth behind what was going on at this anything but normal family home. In a proactive move by police, the next day, the 31st of January, they decided to try to find the child themselves by going to school. To their surprise and relief, the boy did turn up, and he had a tale to tell. Police asked him why he had not been at home, and his answer was shocking. The young man relayed a tale of woe to the officers and described a typical day in his life. He would be woken in the morning, not by someone knocking on his bedroom door, but by the sound of the door in the garage office being unlocked. He would then be allowed to go out and freshen up before making his way to school. When he returned home from school, he was locked up in the office once again. According to the boy, he would spend on average between 16 and 18 hours a day locked in the small room. He would have little or no contact with anyone in the household. He wasn't even allowed to see his 3 brothers and sisters who were living perfectly normal lives in the family home. In a heartbreaking statement, he said that he ran away because he felt nobody wanted or loved him. He said that his father, Timothy, was a very angry and aggressive person who would regularly beat him, not just since they had moved to Florida, but even when the family had lived in Arizona. The decision now was what was best for this young boy. Could he just be a sulky teenager who, like many teenagers, didn't have much time for his parents and their rules? Or was he the victim of both psychological and physical abuse? After he begged the police to not take him home and even said that he would rather go to prison than go back and live with Tracy and Timothy, investigators decided that he could not be returned. Instead, they sought out a search warrant. The warrant was granted, but one of the officers had already seen around the home previously. This time, they knew exactly what they wanted: the video camera footage from that room. Police discovered thousands of hours of footage depicting the abuse that the boy had received. Far from lying about his domestic life, he may have actually underplayed it. Investigators now contacted their colleagues in Arizona and asked them to visit a former home of the Ferriter family. The new owners of the home spoke of how when they moved in, they found a creepy room in the garage that could only be opened from the outside. This all but proved the abuse suffered by the young man had been going on for a long time. On February the 8th, both Timothy and Tracy Ferriter were arrested and charged with aggravated abuse and false imprisonment. Timothy was given an extra charge of child neglect. Both were given a bail of $50,000 each, which they were able to make. Timothy's trial date was set for October of 2023. Before going to trial, like in many cases here in America, he was offered a plea deal. If he pled guilty to all the charges, he would just serve 2 years in prison and a further 5 on probation. He rejected the deal and decided to go to trial.
Details tonight surrounding a Jupiter couple facing child abuse and false imprisonment charges, all stemming from a case that came to light in January of 2022. Timothy and Tracy Ferriter, accused of locking their adopted son in a box for hours at a time. Today, Timothy Ferriter appeared live via Zoom in a pretrial court hearing, rejecting a plea deal offered by the state for 24 months in prison and 5 years probation.
The trial of Timothy Ferriter began on the 4th of October 2023, with his wife's trial date yet to be determined. It would go on for more than a week. It did not begin well for Timothy, an officer from the police who had requested and executed the warrants not just for the Ring cameras around the home, but also a search warrant for the home itself. He described the room, entirely without bias, painting a picture of an enclosure that no person could escape from. Timothy sat, for the most part, very stoic, but at times looked fidgety as the evidence was presented and read aloud. It could be said that there was a touch of arrogance about Mr. Ferriter during the proceedings. He was no lawyer, but he sat next to his defense counsel, firmly upright and taking notes throughout the trial as if he could have any bearing on what was happening.
What is a deadbolt?
A deadbolt is a locking device that probably everyone here has at their residence to secure from anyone entering or exiting an enclosure or room.
And that lock was only on the outside of the door, right?
That's correct.
What about on the inside of the door?
On the inside was only the spot where you'd have to put a key, so there was no way for, if that door was locked, for anyone on the inside to exit.
What about the lights? Did you notice any lights in the enclosure?
Yes.
And what about the light switch?
The light switch was also on the exterior of the room. It was to the left of the door in this photograph.
Now, you stated that you had gotten that search warrant from Ring, correct?
That's correct.
And you were able to access all about 21,000 videos?
That's correct.
Okay. And you said that you had reviewed those videos before?
That's correct.
With video evidence and a makeshift prison cell in the home, the defense team had quite a job on their hands. As far as wrongful imprisonment went, it would be difficult to deny, but they did try to prove to the best of their ability that the actions of Tracy and Timothy had not been malicious and had instead been the results of some very difficult behavioral patterns by the 14-year-old. That wasn't their only card to play, though. They also focused on body cameras worn by officers who had first entered the property on February the 8th. A snippet of body cam footage lasting 8 minutes is played to the judge and jury, something that the prosecution had tried to object to. This, however, was overruled by the judge. The defense was trying to show that law enforcement had been far too heavy-handed. They had entered the home with their weapons drawn, which the defense said was intimidating to the couple and any of the children that may have been home. The prosecution passed this off as irrelevant and a cheap trick to try to make law enforcement look bad in front of the jury.
Does that conclude the video? All right, let me hear a brief argument from the state on your objection again.
That portion should not be shown. Also,
up to what portion?
I know they started at 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The beginning 4 minutes and 19 seconds should not be shown. So if they're starting it at 4 minutes and 20 seconds, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is that this is the execution of the search warrant. The detective was not part of the execution of the search warrant. He was present after the fact or even at that time, but he did not himself go into the house until after, when the CSI was taking pictures. And the fact that there's weapons drawn, there are officers that have like the protective shield, none of that is relevant to them showing the layout of the house. If they want to show the layout of the house, there may be a different body-worn camera to do that.
All right, response, Mr. Wahid, and then I'll make a ruling.
The defense then carried on trying to discredit the law enforcement officer and accuse him of making assumptions about the case rather than basing his testimony on fact.
Thank you. And it was a search warrant, not a subpoena. And the date range was from December 28th, 2021 to January 31st, 2022.
All right. And in that month and a few days, there were 21,000 different video clips that you obtained, correct?
That's correct.
And you said you reviewed most of them, correct?
That's correct.
And on direct, you said that that the child used that Home Depot bucket to both urinate and defecate.
That's correct.
Which video did you ever see where he defecated in that bucket?
I did not see a video where he defecated in the bucket.
And you're aware that the Ferriters had very recently moved into that house, correct?
That's correct.
Somewhere in late December of 2021.
That's correct.
Shortly before the Ring camera was set up and where the dates of the videos start. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In the pictures that you'd introduced on direct, you can see in the master bedroom a picture, a big picture that is still on the ground in the master bedroom. You see boxes in other parts of the house. There's still an effort of moving in happening that you can see evidenced in those pictures, correct?
Overruled. If you know, you can answer.
If you're saying that it appears that they were just moving in, it didn't appear to me that they were just moving in the residence. It appeared that the residence had been lived in for some time, especially if you looked in the garage. You could see that there were several items that were there that had been appeared to be stored there for some time, and there was also a subsequent enclosure in which the victim was made to stay in.
In a change of tack, the defense wanted to focus on different items in the room, mainly the bucket. The officer had stated that the teen had used the bucket to urinate and defecate, but the defense argued that there wasn't a shred of video evidence for this. Then they moved to the fact that the family hadn't been living in the property for too long. Some might call this a desperate argument, but it was observant. Some items that were seen in the home included boxes and pictures on the floor in the master bedroom. As a result, the defense tried to argue that this bucket could simply have been left around the home because they hadn't gotten around to putting it in its proper place. On day 2 of the trial, the prosecution upped the ante. One of their witnesses was the older sister of the boy. Her identity was, of course, protected, but her testimony was honest and damning.
And you never obviously saw any of the medical reports that your parents saw, correct?
No.
And at some point, you were told by your parents.
Objection as to hearsay?
Sustained.
Goes to effect on the listener, Judge.
I'm going to sustain the
Irrelevant,
objection.
Your Honor.
I'm sorry? Ms. Cochler, you renewing?
Nothing else, Your Honor.
Ms. Coakley, are you renewing your objection? He's arguing the exception.
Your Honor, I would say then it goes to if there's not relevance, the effect on her.
Sustained.
Within a matter of minutes, the defense went from rather laid back to a much more aggressive stance, objecting almost every time the child opened her mouth. These objections ranged from claiming that her statements or the questions were irrelevant to claiming them as hearsay and not factual.
So let's go back to the food snacks. Yesterday you said he was essentially not allowed to have food and snacks, but the other kids were, correct?
Yes.
All right. Were you aware that, did you think your brother at any point looked malnourished or in any way like he was getting too thin or anything like that?
Yes.
And when did you convey that to anybody?
I never said anything.
All right. And are you aware that the doctors he saw always found that he was appropriate?
Hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained. Sustained, and it's an improper question because you're assuming facts not in evidence, Mr. Waid. The objection is sustained.
Well, I'll be able to tie it up later, Judge. So it's a question of what she knows.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Move on.
Okay. Yesterday, you said that about the snacks, that he wasn't allowed to have snacks. Isn't it true you do not know if, when he was hungry, that he actually ate snacks or not? You don't know that.
Sorry. Repeat that?
Sure. You're unaware that one was hungry. Whether or not he actually ate a snack, you don't know that.
He wasn't allowed to get his own snacks.
You would think that in a courtroom a child would be handled with care, but on a few occasions the judge had to sustain objections and tell the defense to change their questioning because of the way they kept trying to catch the girl out. She was asked if she ever thought that her brother looked underweight or malnourished, to which she said yes. She also said that her brother wasn't allowed to eat snacks, but the defense argued that no one could know that for certain if the boy was allowed snacks or not. Next was the turn of the boy himself to appear on the stand. He didn't come across as very emotional about his ordeal, but he certainly described it in detail. The prosecution moved on to the question of the bucket in the corner of the room, which the boy confirmed was for toilet use, blowing the defense argument out of the water, stating that there wasn't any evidence for this.
So, the floor was concrete, but I used these little 16 by 16 inch mats of carpet to put down on the floor, so it wasn't so hard.
Okay, so it had a concrete floor, but on top there was a carpet laid on top of it.
Yes.
What kind of furniture did you have in that room?
I had a desk and a bed.
Did the bed have a bed frame, or what was it like?
The bed had no frame, had no box spring. It was just a mattress on the floor.
Okay. And mattress on the floor, what size of mattress was it?
Size of the mattress was a twin size.
Now, did the room have any windows or any outside light?
No, it only had an air conditioner.
Okay. Let's talk about that air conditioner for a second. Were you allowed to touch or operate the air conditioner?
No.
Were you allowed to turn it on if you were hot or turn it off if you were too cold?
No.
Would you get in trouble if you touched the air conditioner at all?
Yes.
And who did that direction come from?
Tim.
Did the room have any lights?
It had a light, but it was controlled outside the room.
Okay, so if you wanted to turn on the light, is that something that you could do when you were inside the room?
No.
Did you have any control over when the lights were on or when the lights were off? Who controlled that?
My parents, Tim or Tracy.
Okay. And what time would you get home from school?
Around 3:30.
And then when you would get home from school, on most days, what would happen?
I'd be put back into my room.
Okay. And when you say put back into the room, are you locked in the room?
Yes.
And would you have been allowed to leave the room during that time? Would you be allowed, or did I confuse you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have the choice if you wanted to say sit in the living room and watch TV after school? Is that something that you could do?
No.
Could you be in the house? In the main house?
No.
Now, so you get back around 3:30, and then how long do you stay in the room in the afternoon?
On most days, until 7 o'clock or dinner time.
Okay. Would you eat dinner in the room or with the family?
In the room.
And are there some times on occasion that you would be allowed to eat dinner with the family?
Yes.
Most of the time, though, where were you eating dinner?
In my room.
And when you're eating dinner in the room, are you locked in the room?
Yes.
Are you, did they ever let you out before bed to go to the bathroom?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that sometimes when you get angry, you throw things,
Yes.
you kick things,
Yeah.
and you punch things?
No.
The questioning from the prosecution then changed to focus on the daily routine for the boy. He talked about going to school and having a small packed lunch, but not being allowed anything else until he got home. After getting home from school around 3:30 in the afternoon, he would then be returned to his room and left there, sometimes in the dark, until sometime around 7 o'clock at night, when he would be given dinner. On rare occasions, he was allowed to eat dinner with the family, but more often than not, he would have to eat alone in the garage. So when it was the turn of the defense to question the young man, they then focused on his past behavior and in doing so, again tried to show that the behavior of Tracy and Timothy was that of two caring parents who had run out of ideas about what to do with an unruly child. In fairness to the defense, they did manage to prove that the teen was unruly and had on many occasions been very difficult. He had damaged items at school such as laptops and tables. He had, in the past, had a tendency to destroy things or lash out in an attempt to get his own way. A psychologist who specialized in children's behavior was also summoned to the stand. He explained how this kind of punishment or mistreatment, whichever way you want to describe it, usually has the opposite effect on the person. Rather than making them behave and accept rules, it would actually make them act out more. Simply locking them away with very little contact with other people gives them social anxiety, which leads to aggression and frustration.
So it can have, in general, it can cause more internalizing symptoms where the child will become depressed or withdrawn or isolating of themselves from others, or it can go the other way, externalizing, where they might start acting out, running away, being aggressive. It can affect their schoolwork, where they can't concentrate, their grades start going down. It can cause a lot of problems with them being able to interact positively and in a good way socially with their peers. They may have problems on the playground. They may have problems with even just following the general rules of the school, whatever that might be.
Now, concentrating on kind of some of the videos that you were able to see of his reactions in the room. Anything about that you think was indicative of a psychological impact on the victim while he's in the room?
Well, yes, it's consistent with a child who has post-traumatic stress disorder. There was when the parent, his father, would come in the room and approach him, he would stiffen up, he would lower his head, you could barely hear his speech when he did talk, and he seemed to be in a very high state of fear. But that tenseness is though the adrenaline's flowing, and he's afraid of another abusive episode occurring or being harmed, or he said he was even afraid of being killed.
Much to the surprise of the people in the courtroom, the young man didn't seem to hold any malice towards the couple, speaking of forgiveness and how he would not hold a grudge against them, even calling their actions a mistake at one point. Some might say this was a very compassionate statement. Maybe more intriguing was the way the court camera kept switching to Tracy Ferriter. Her behaviors seemed erratic. One minute she would be looking distraught and bursting into tears. Then next she would be sitting stern-faced, looking on as her husband was locked in an uphill struggle to save his freedom. The attorney for the prosecution makes a passionate speech in court in which she stated in plain language that it was not possible to build a cell in your garage accidentally, and that it was not possible to repeatedly lock a child into a dark room for 16 to 18 hours a day by accident.
He leaves the room at 9:05. He told us he got left around 9 to go to school. And then he returns to the room at 4:59, so after school. And then he leaves the room to go to the bathroom at 5:56 to 6:18 p.m., and then he's in for the rest of the night. So the total, if we go 12 a.m. to 12 p.m., is 14 hours and 22 minutes of a 24-hour day, and he went to school. Huge portions of this child's life are alone in this room. On January 13th, same thing. He goes out for 2 minutes to go to the bathroom at 7 o'clock in the morning, almost 8. He leaves the room to go to school at 9 o'clock. Back in the room at 4:49. He gets dinner at 7:02 and lights off at 7:26. He's in there for 16 hours. If we're going from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. And he went to school. January 20th, same thing. 6:43 to 6:45. Leaves the room at 9. Back in at 4:45. This time without the lights on.
In their closing remarks, the prosecution started to dismantle the mitigation presented by the defense. Earlier in the trial, as we mentioned, the defense had made the case that because of the child's behavior, Timothy and Tracy had to keep the boy separate, not just for punishment, but also for the protection of his family.
You get to use your common sense. Every single day in courtrooms around the country, we convene ordinary people, and we ask them to use their common sense about what is reasonable and about what is appropriate and what evidence is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. For about 6 weeks, he was locked in a room in Jupiter, Florida. And yeah, he got to go to school, and sometimes he got to go on a scooter, and sometimes he got to play with the dog. But as you heard from Dr. Meyer, that doesn't change the impact of this type of treatment has on any child, but absolutely on a child like the defendant's intentional, repeated acts caused harm. Any person would know, any reasonable parent would know that this is not acceptable. Any reasonable parent or person would know that this is going to harm. And despite that, over and over and over again, Tim Ferriter made that intentional, deliberate decision to treat his son like this. That's actual malice. That's intentional torture. That is willful caging. It's aggravated child abuse. It's child neglect, and it's certainly false imprisonment. It's not just one thing or one moment. It is all the things, over and over and over again. What the defendant did was a crime, and that's why we're here today. Like I told you, it was dehumanizing, and it was traumatic, and it should never have been done. Based on all of the evidence, that is why we are asking you, all of that evidence, those hours of tedious videos, and I know it was tedious to watch them, but the reason that we did is to see just a moment of what that tedious was like for here. Based on all of the evidence and based on the laws of the state of Florida, we're asking you for the only verdict that is supported by the evidence and supported by the law. And that is a verdict of guilty. Thank you.
Next was the turn of the defense to convince the jury in their closing remarks that Timothy Ferriter was innocent.
Clear and convincing evidence is the standard by which the government
Overruled.
can take your children away from you. And then higher than that, you have beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest burden in our justice system. And this distinction is important because when we talk about bad parenting or someone that shouldn't have their kids, there's a standard for that in the legal system. There's a system in place for that. What you are being asked to do is determine if something is a crime, if it rises to the level of reasonable doubt, such that a person whose liberty and freedom is at stake, as it is in any criminal case, should be found guilty of a crime. You are not being asked whether you condone of Tim Ferriter's actions. I put up an expert, Sheila Rappa, who says she does not condone of Tim Ferriter's actions. And I didn't do that not knowing what she was going to say. This case is about a different sort of location and time than what the state's talking about.
It must be said, the statement by the defense got off to a rocky start. The attorney uses the words horrible and bad parenting, not exactly a vote of confidence in their client. She continued with statements such as, I do not condone Tim Ferriter's actions, nor does the expert doctor I called as a witness. The next stage of the closing arguments was for the defense to focus on where the crimes may have been committed. So the defense was happy enough to admit that a crime had taken place, but they wanted the jury to believe that the crimes may have taken place in Arizona, not Florida, meaning they couldn't be tried in a Florida court. And thus, Tim would be given a shorter sentence or found not guilty. There was a problem with that argument, though. There was clear video evidence shown to the court of the room being built in Florida. It was nearly impossible that any jury would possibly believe that no crimes took place in the state of Florida.
And Dr. Rappa said that it's really common in her field, and she's worked with a lot of children who have similar issues and a lot of parents in these types of situations as well. And it's very normal to feel extremely frustrated with the mental health system, right? Because you keep doing stuff, you keep taking them to the appointments, and nothing is helping. And not one of these doctors recommended inpatient treatment. Not one of these doctors recommended what Dr. Rappa said would be appropriate treatments for reactive attachment disorder. So they're following the advice that they are receiving, and nothing is helping. When I was talking to in cross-examination, he had to be reminded of this, but he said that he was going in Arizona to appointments about once a week. So many that he didn't remember who the providers were. So this idea that they didn't try is not true.
Next, it was the turn of the healthcare system to be blamed for Timothy's actions. The defense now portrayed Tim's actions as those of a desperate man who had run out of ideas. A man who had been failed by numerous doctors and healthcare professionals in his alleged quest to make his son behave normally.
As to count 2, we find the defendant guilty of false imprisonment as charged in the information. As to count 3, we find the defendant guilty of neglect of a child as charged in the information. So we say all this 12th day of October 2023 in West Palm Beach, Florida, signed by the jury foreperson.
Timothy Ferriter is now facing up to 40 years in prison when he is sentenced later in November. After he was found guilty, the defense filed a motion to have him released from jail until the trial, but after review, the judge threw that out. Some have said the potential sentencing facing Mr. Ferriter is a bit harsh, but put yourself in the shoes of that 14-year-old boy. If he did not suffer from claustrophobia, he certainly will now. As stated by one of the doctors in his trial, this kind of treatment at such a young age can and possibly will have a detrimental impact on his life as he moves forward. It is extremely unlikely that he will remain with Tracy Ferriter now. This is perhaps a glimmer of hope for his future prospects, but there can be little doubt that there will be a long road back to being able to function and behave acceptably in society. Tracy Ferriter has not had her court date set yet. It is unclear how much involvement she had, but the young boy was very clear that she knew and saw everything that was going on and did not try to stop it, which makes her complicit in the crimes. If she herself is sent to prison, then all of the children would surely be split up. The only good thing that can come out of this case is the hope that the young boy and potentially the other children are given new starts with two people who are fit to be given the gift of parenthood. Certainly Timothy, but also maybe Tracy, as a result of their methods of punishment, are about to find out how the U.S. punishes adults who behave this way. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.